Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host Scott Karasik. Today we are joined by Charles McDonald of Setting the Edge podcast. We're also joined by Emory Hunt of Football Gameplan. And today we're going to talk quite a bit about the draft today. We'll also be focusing in on the Atlanta Falcons as usual on this show. And let me welcome Charles back to the show. He's been on the show many times over the last few years. So welcome back, Charles.
Glad to be here. I love this show.
Okay. Emory, and I believe, I'm pretty sure this is your first time on the show, so welcome to the show. Hopefully you don't judge us too harshly for how loose we try to keep it.
Nah, I appreciate you guys having me on, man. It should be fun.
All right. So as anybody who's been regularly listening to this show the last couple of weeks, we've been sort of diving deep on the Falcons' needs. We'll continue to do that. We've looked a little bit in the last week. We talked quite a bit about the edge and right guard position, and I do want to get Charles and Emory's takes on that. Well, let's just jump right into that. Do you guys and I'll ask you this first, Charles, since you're a little dialed in a little bit more on the Falcons, I guess. Do you feel like either one of those two spots is the biggest need, and do you feel like one over the other one is the biggest need for the Falcons?
Yeah, I think right guard is probably bigger need than edge right now, just because I don't really like the idea of going into training camp with Hugh Thornton, who hasn't played that, or who's been injured a lot recently, and then Garland and I forget the guy, Wes Schweitzer. So those are your three guys who are going to play right guard. That's probably, that's actually a pretty big weakness on the offensive line. And I know the other four spots are, I would say, above average, but having one huge weak link like that can bring everybody else down. So I think right guard is definitely a bigger need, especially since they brought in, Jack Crawford and Poe to kind of shore up the defensive line. I think you got to figure out something for that right guard spot.
Emory, I'm curious, do you have a perspective on this looking from the outside in? Do you feel like, given the state of the Falcons roster, one of those two positions sort of shoots to the top of your list as a need for the Falcons?
I would automatically say guard because, again, I think Charles echoed the point, pretty eloquently about Hugh Thornton. And just to me, I think that's the most important part of the offensive line. You look at guard, center, guard. A lot of people make a noise about the tackle position, but if you're not good on the inside, you won't have, a good offensive line. And the results, so your guard has to be strong.
Okay. Now, on the note of the Falcons' needs at this, given the Falcons are coming off a Super Bowl, given position where they are.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Are you?
Charles, you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. But if a guy like Forrest Lamp kind of falls to, if a guy like Forrest Lamp falls to 31, I think that should take 5 seconds to turn that card in and make the pick. But if he's not there and if they're a little bit scared off by maybe Dan Feeney's concussion issues, I'm okay with just saying, this is the guy we have rated the highest, as long as it's not a quarterback or a running back, because they're kind of stacked at those positions. I wouldn't really have a problem. If they took, if they say Hassan Reddick is on the board at 31 and he's there and you want to take him, and you want to put him at a weak side linebacker, keep Deion Jones in the middle, and then slide Devondre Campbell over to Sam, I would really be down with that. Just because they're always looking to add more speed on defense. We already heard Dan Quinn talk about, he really likes Reddick as a player.
That's my thoughts on that as well. You can go with a guy at linebacker like Reddick because he also provides you a little bit of pass rush, a little bit of cover. Well, probably a lot more coverage than we're expecting, even though we didn't see it. But a guy like Reddick, hell, I think the BPA is going to end up being an edge. It wouldn't shock me if Derek Barnett's available at 31.
Yeah, the NFL teams are stupid, so you can expect what the Falcons pick. They're going to have like 15 guys that should have went 15 spots earlier at your disposal. So you're going to see some great defensive players. You're going to see some great offensive players as well right there. Now, I think, looking at it, you guys say Hassan Reddick. It's funny. I think a lot of people thought he was this outstanding pass rusher, but that's not his game. He's a better interior blitzer than opposed to going outside on the edge. I was at the Temple, South Florida game, Temple, East Carolina game, and each time those offensive tackles were able to manhandle him at the point, but when they allowed him to move around and blitzed him inside, he was able to have success. Now, his coverage is phenomenal because he came into Temple as running back, played some receiver, played some defensive back as well before finally settling in at linebacker. So all those experiences kind of helped him be the player that he is right now. So that would be a good pick. But I think at pick 31, the Falcons are going to have at least 15 to 20 players they could choose from.
Yeah. On Reddick specifically, I know Charles knows how I felt about Darren Lee last year, but I feel like Reddick is the player that people hype Darren Lee up to be in terms of his sort of speed and versatility and athleticism. I feel like Reddick is more that guy that I'd be much more willing to sort of take a chance on with a high pick. And so if he's there at 31, I would have no issues with the Falcons taking him. Emory, I am curious sort of where do you sort of fall on the sort of line of best player available versus picking for need? Do you have a philosophy on that, or is it you don't have a take on that?
I always feel as though you have to take the best player at the biggest position of need for your team, and there's no downside to stockpiling good football players on a football team. I mean, that's ultimately how you win the game. So if the Falcons, let's say, are sitting there and for whatever reason, Fournette is there, or let's say Dan Feeney is there, let's say Derek Rivers is there, right? You look at, okay, that's three outstanding players. For me, I will go with Feeney because, obviously right guard need. And then you look at Rivers, and then maybe you look at Fournette. Although Fournette graded out higher than all three of those guys for me, and he's a great player. But if I'm the Falcons, I'm taking the best player of what I need the most.
So here's the thought on Feeney. Because of his concussion issues, because of all that, do you see a chance where he falls to 63? Because on average, most times guards, there's one or maybe two that go in the first 60 picks.
Yeah, I mean, guard, because, again, the NFL does things backwards a lot. If they were smart, they'd value guards and centers more so than tackles. But it wouldn't shock me to see a guard going that low because, again, they look at tackles and they're going to fly off the board. Tackles will fly off the board. Linebackers, outside linebackers start to fly off the board. Cornerbacks will fly off the board. And then you're sitting there in round 3 and you have like these premier guards, running backs, some solid quarterbacks that'll still be there, all because they put a premium on certain positions and let those fly off the draft board first.
Okay. So we got a couple questions from our listeners. Emory, this one's first directed at you. It comes from Javon Sims at Speed Loving Her on Twitter. He asks, Emory, what are your thoughts on the running back class? Any potential studs outside the obvious 4 in Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, and Leonard Fournette?
Yeah, first you take Alvin Kamara's name out that list, but for me, I look at a guy like Kareem Hunt. He's outstanding. A guy that can do it all. We saw him in 3 different body types over the course of his career at Toledo. When he first got there, he was a little pudgy, but still had a good amount of wiggle, had that vision. As a sophomore and junior, he started to gain a little bit more weight, so he became more of a one-cut downhill runner. This past year, senior season, he was able to cut weight, leaned up, rocked up a little bit on the muscles, and didn't lose that speed or that vision. So I think he's the complete back that you look for. Jamal Williams out of BYU is another one. I'm a big fan of Tariq Cohen out of North Carolina A&T. People going to knock him because of his size at 5'6", 179, but you can't hit or break what you can't touch or catch. So if you can't get your hands on the guy, then you're going to have a hard time, hitting him or trying to put a hand on him. And I also like Aaron Jones out of UTEP. Again, fluid runner, plays a game a lot like how Curtis Martin played it when he came out of Pitt, and how he just didn't know how he gained yards. but you always saw him gaining yards, and that's what Aaron Jones brings to the table. Those are some of the backs that I truly like. Even a guy like James Conner, I think, is going to still get better as a pro, because I think a lot of people forget the fact that he played both sides of the ball as a freshman. He played DN, then he also played running back, and I still think he has growth left in his game.
You said the magic words about James Conner, since I'm a Pitt guy, so you know what to say. So I agree with you on that one. Charles, we did get a question from the same guy, Javon. He asked you. He asked it also me, but I don't really have an answer, so I'll just pass the buck and give it to you, Charles. What is your 4-round mock? Your top 4 rounds, including a trade, if any.
I don't have it. I'm sorry. I mean, like last year, I did some mock drafts, but at 31, I just don't know what's going to happen. There's just too much stuff that's going to happen before they pick. I honestly haven't taken like a serious time to think about who could be there besides like Forrest Lamp, Derek Rivers. Like that's pretty much it. So Derek Rivers at 31, and then the rest is who knows. Mock drafts aren't really my thing.
I do have an answer for this question. I lied a little bit. I did. Was it FanSpeak that does the mock drafts that you can do online? I did one of theirs like a week or so ago, and I had I think it was Lamp as the number 1 pick. I think it was Charles Harris in round 2. In round 3, I think it was Jaleel Johnson. In round 4, I had George Kittle, I think, with the pick. So, that I don't think that includes a trade. Sorry, Javon, if that was sort of the deal breaker for you. But, that's one possible scenario or whatever. Okay, so we got those questions out of the hand. Let's dive a little deeper on the Falcons' needs. As I said earlier at the top of the show, Scott and I have talked quite a bit about the needs overall, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper on sort of after the big 2 needs at edge and right guard. What are some of the other areas of the roster that the Falcons could wind up addressing? Charles, do you have any thoughts on maybe what you would put ahead of some of the other spots in terms of area of the roster that you would like to see the Falcons address reasonably early in this draft?
I wouldn't be afraid. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to a tight end across from Austin Hooper. I think Levine Toilolo did a good job last season, but adding competition for the 2 of them is, never a bad thing in my opinion. So if you could add a guy at tight end, maybe a running back on day 3, and I would assume they're going to draft like a safety or a corner just because Dan Quinn has talked in the past about you can never have too many defensive backs. So, I mean, honestly, if they can get a defensive end and right guard settled down in the first 2 picks, then I'm honestly okay with them taking pretty much anybody. But tight end, just to add some more firepower on offense, and then somebody in the defensive backfield.
So someone like Marcus May in the 3rd round, you wouldn't be opposed to?
No.
I don't think the team really has a backup free safety right now.
I think that could be Brian Poole, though, if they draft a corner.
I think it could be Poole, but at the same time, do you want a guy – would it not make sense to go out and get a guy like Marcus May who already would kind of know the scheme?
It would, but I mean, Poole played some free safety at Florida when all those guys, like Hargreaves and Tabor and Quincy Wilson at corner. So I don't really think it would be that big of a conversion for him.
And people forget Poole did play some safety last summer in preseason. It was a 3rd-string free safety. But, I know people zoned out in the 4th quarter of some of those preseason games, so they probably forgot it. Emory, I'm curious if you, when you watched the Falcons this year, were there any parts of their roster that we haven't quite talked about that you looked at and said, maybe if the Falcons could add a player at this spot that would really sort of, hopefully take them to the next level and maybe win a Super Bowl as opposed to losing it?
Cornerback for me, honestly, man. I'm not the biggest of fans of Jalen Collins. I think he's a liability out there. So for me, I will look at a corner after those 2 early needs are met. I just think that when you look at a couple of guys that are versatile, let's say Brendan Langley out of Lamar, long arm, 6'2" type corner, Rasul Douglas, another 6'2" type corner, that can play on the outside, which will push a guy like Robert Alford inside. Or if you just want to get a guy to go on the inside, looking at DeMonte KZ out of San Diego State. Two small school guys I really like as well. They got that versatility to play either corner or safety. You look at Willie Bailey out of Virginia Union, a guy that I think was a Florida Gator at one point and then transferred down to Virginia Union. He played both for the Panthers and was able to pick off a lot of passes. He has that great range, and he does a good job of playing off. You also look at a guy that started out where you love, Pitt, and Titus Howard out of Slippery Rock. I did the color commentary for Slippery Rock, Westchester, and Howard was all over the field. And this is a guy at 6'2", 185, can play in the slot, can play on either side on the outside, and also has the ability to play back deep and has ball skills as does Willie Bailey. So I think those are some options that kind of fit what Dan Quinn looks for in corners. And to me, I think that would slide everyone down to a more natural spots where the Falcons can really go out there with three corners and feel confident that one will not be the lock that give up the big play.
Well, Emory, you made a lot of enemies in the Falcon fan base because there's a lot of people out there that vehemently disagree with the Falcons taking cornerback. I'm sort of with you in that sense. I do feel like they can get better at that spot. I don't look at it as necessarily a huge need that they need to address over some of these other positions, but I do think it's a possible spot that the Falcons could wind up addressing later in the draft if the right player is available, and some of those guys that you named may be that guy. I'm sort of with Charles on sort of upgrading the tight end position. I feel like the Falcons can certainly get by with Hooper and Toilolo as their top two guys on the depth chart, but getting a guy that can be a little bit more of a third tight end option. I know we had a listener question. Someone asked, I might as well read that right now so I don't get it wrong.
Griswold. Griswold is a good tight end you guys have on the roster.
Yeah, I think the Falcons have a bunch of bodies, but nobody improving. We got a question from Derek Hunter at D-Rock the Party on Twitter. He said, basically he asked, why didn't the team like using 13 personnel when Hooper was the tight end number one? And he posted some stats as a follow-up to that question showing how often the Falcons used the 13 personnel grouping early in the season when Tammy was the starting tight end. Hooper was more of the number three guy. And then once Tammy went out with injury, they sort of dialed back on the number three guy. And I think the answer to Derek's question is basically they didn't really trust who their third tight end was once Tammy went out. And that was a combination of Josh Perkins and DJ Lavea, and Griswold was on the practice squad. But based off of their personnel groupings in the second half of the season, the reason why they didn't use as much 13 personnel, I think, was because they didn't really trust that third tight end. And, Perkins played for Steve Sarkisian at Washington, so that certainly does give him somewhat of a leg up, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that he's going to be the guy that they're looking for at that spot. So if they can certainly upgrade with a mid-round pick in a really deep tight end class, I think that's a smart move for the Falcons and sort of get a guy. I think there's two possible options and two types of players that they might look at. They might look at a guy that's, a guy like Kittle, who I think is sort of a versatile guy that you can sort of line up in line and also use him as an H-back to sort of offset a little bit the loss of fullback Patrick DeMarco. Or you can get a pure inline guy, and I wouldn't be up on exactly who those guys would be that you can get out of the first few rounds, but someone that potentially could be groomed to replace Toilolo a few years down the line, I think would be smart. Charles, you talked about the tight end position. Do you feel like there's a certain flavor of that spot that you want the team to go at?
The ideal guy would be, a guy like O.J. Howard or David Njoku or Evan Ingram who can, really run and make explosive plays after the catch. But I don't know if a guy like that's going to be there by the time the Falcons probably should address the tight end position. If they're there at the third round, a guy I like is Gerald Everett from South Alabama. I think he can kind of fit that receiver role, explosive receiver role that they don't really have on the roster right now. Because I think Hooper is more of a possession guy, and Toilolo is a blocker who can come up with a big play if you scheme him open. But they don't really have anyone that can burn a safety or get open deep. So I think a guy like Gerald Everett would make a lot of sense at the end of the third round if he's there.
The other thought is, why not get 2 tight ends? Because you're going to see a lot more 12 personnel with Sarkisian here based on just what he did in Washington, what he did at USC. So why not get that second tight end, like get both that fullback type and that second, I guess, Toilolo inline style tight end, get like a George Kittle for that H-back role, that Chris Cooley type role, and then get like Farrell Brown, or Jake Butt, take a chance on one of these guys that got hurt.
I mean, I would rather just give Josh Perkins a chance for that job than spend 2 picks on tight ends.
Yeah, I'm sort of in line with that with Charles. Like, I'd like to give Perkins or T. LaVey or Griswold or was it Brian Vogler, one of those guys, an opportunity to win the job. I think one tight end probably does it for you, just because I think if you take 2, you're basically stashing that guy for the long haul because you're not necessarily sure when he's going to get an opportunity to play. But Emory, are there any sort of tight ends that you're looking at maybe as some mid-round sleepers that you feel like could sort of fit the mold for the Falcons?
Oh, absolutely. There's a bunch of sleepers at this position, man. 2 guys in particular that played down at the East-West Shrine game, and Anthony Auclair out of Laval, CFL, a Canadian college program. And normally you don't see guys coming from Canada that are physically strong at the point of attack. It's rare. The Saints have one. And David Onyemata, defensive lineman, he tore up the East-West Shrine game last year. And this past season, Auclair was a man amongst boys in line. And you don't normally, first of all, you don't normally see the tight end position in Canada because it's more of an offensive lineman or it's more of a receiver, kind of like what you guys already have in Hooper. But when you look at Auclair, he's able to play in line, and his route running is obviously up to par because of how they play up north. And he was a monster all week long. He played well. I think he's a guy, he's 6'5", about 250. So he fits that inline portion along with Eric Saubert out of Drake, who was their number 1 passing option for the Bulldogs. And he's another one that can play inline, held his own in a blocking department all week at the East-West Shrine game. But he can also flex out and do his thing. Another guy to keep an eye on is Billy Brown out of Shepherd. Now, he calls himself a wide receiver, but he's essentially an H-back. It's kind of like Jordan Reed. He's 6'4", 245. He was giving the defensive backs on the West team boatload of problems all week long because they complained about, oh, he's just a big guy. All he's doing is running slants. Well, at some point, you got to stop him. And so if you move him down inside, you have a guy that can play the receiver position. He can be flex a little bit. And I think as far as like run blocking on a perimeter, he definitely can handle that. So there's a bunch of all 3 of those guys, in my opinion, are a lot better than Kittle because they're more consistent in catching the football and they're a little bit more dynamic within their routes and also after the catch.
Okay. You are a fountain of knowledge, Emory. That's why we had you on. We talked a little bit about the secondary. Charles, what do you think about the Falcons adding another D tackle to their mix? I know that's your wheelhouse. They did get Poe. They've added guys like Crawford and Shelby in the last 2 off seasons that can play a little bit inside and out. They have Hageman, who came into his own down the stretch. We all know Grady Jarrett is sort of the guy in the middle, and it's basically finding a running mate for him. They still have Claiborne who can kick inside and nickel, so they have options at the D tackle position. But Poe is an undrafted, or is going to be a free agent next year. Claiborne's going to be a free agent next year. Hageman's going to be a free agent next year. Shelby's coming off an Achilles, and there's a possibility that if he's not up to par this season, the Falcons could move on from him after this upcoming season next year. So there is a little bit of a flux at that D tackle position. Would you like to see the Falcons sort of solidify that with a draft pick that they can sort of build on for the future?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day. When you look at what the Falcons have on defense, they have like a lot of guys that can play inside and out, like you said. Derek Shelby, Jack Crawford, Adrian Claiborne, Courtney Upshaw. But I think they could. I think they could stand to use one more like true defensive tackle body. So, I mean, if I know Hageman is hot in Falcons Twitter right now because he had a good stretch of back half of the season, played well in the playoffs. But I still think you could use more insurance there. And with Poe, having that injured back, you never really know if that's going to flare up again. So I was just thinking the other day, actually, how would you feel if they picked a guy like Chris Wormley at 63?
I love it. I think
that would make a lot of sense.
Wormley's awesome, and Wormley can do that 5 technique role in base, and he can play that 3 technique as well. I mean, he's athletically basically the same as Fletcher Cox too, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think Wormley is awesome. I think he was the best D lineman on Michigan's team, and was most consistent. Down in, down out. He was the threat to me that freed up stuff on the outside for Charlton. I think Wormley would be a phenomenal pick. I'll also throw out a local guy for you guys. Played up the road at Albany State in Grover Stewart. He's 6'4", 347, but you swear he's an outside linebacker how he moves. And so a guy like that is able to play multiple spots up front and handle any role will be one to keep an eye on. I know he tested well, but as far as how he plays on film, again, it is Division II, but you want a guy to stand out, and he was virtually unblockable throughout the course of his career.
Okay. Yeah. With Wormley, I wouldn't be against that. He's one of the handful of interior defensive linemen that I actually like in this draft class. So if the Falcons wound up with him, I wouldn't have any complaints about that. What about Charles? I'm curious where you sort of stand on this issue, because I've had some interesting conversations with some people about it. What do you feel about the Falcons' sort of vacancy at strong side linebacker with Philip Wheeler being unsigned? Do you feel like that's Vic Beasley's spot now, or do you feel like the Falcons need to bring in somebody else that can sort of play that, or maybe even think about moving Brooks Reed back to that spot this year?
Yeah, I think they can move Brooks Reed back there. But, I mean, how often did they really even play like that underfront last season? Where that's a huge concern? Because, I mean, they're probably in nickel, 60, 65% of the time last season. So, honestly, you can kind of rotate Vic Beasley and Brooks Reed at that strong side linebacker spot, and that's not a problem to me. I'm not really concerned about that spot.
Okay. All right.
I think more worrisome is the depth behind Campbell and the competition with Campbell.
Yeah, I would agree there. They could use another guy to push Campbell at weak side linebacker.
Okay, you're not a Kamal Ishmael truther on that one.
Well, honestly, I forgot that they re-signed him. But yeah, actually, well, when you put it like that, that makes sense. But still, that's only 3 guys that's going to rotate between. If you're going to use Kamal Ishmael as a strong safety too, that's really only 3 guys who have legit game experience with Keanu Neal, Kamal Ishmael, and Devondre Campbell. I think they could use another guy as one of those middle defenders in the cover 3.
You were going to say something, Emory.
Well, I look at a guy like Jimmy Gilbert out of Colorado. I'm a big fan of his game. I think he's somebody that could fit what they're looking for. Even if you're looking for someone that can provide a little bit of pass rush. I don't know where Freeney stands. I'm not saying he is Freeney, but a guy like Ewan Price out of Pitt would be a nice addition as well, where he can just come off the edge and really rush the quarterback. And quite honestly, I've seen him get out in space. He's not awkward in space either. So he, as far as short area coverage is concerned, he can do his thing there. But for the most part, you bringing him in to get after the quarterback. I think he'd be a good fit.
Emory, I'm curious, since you're known as a small school guru. Who's the guy from Eastern Washington? Is it Ebukam?
Samson Ebukam. Yeah, he was was funny because he was a football game plan preseason All-American. But he was a guy that I was surprised at how he met. Initially you can't really trust what these school websites tell you as far as height and weight, because preseason he was listed as 6'3", 250, but he's really 6'1", about 240. And he's more of an outside linebacker, but he is outstanding. I think he has that it factor, that burst that they look for coming off the edge, and he can also drop back in coverage. He wasn't a problem there. Another guy to keep in mind would probably be Carter Schultz out of Northern Iowa, another one that played a lot of different roles for the Panthers, and he was another one that's coming off a very good week at the East-West Shrine game. But he was a sack master at Northern Iowa. He's not the strongest. He's a weaker version of Brooks Reed, but he's one that definitely knows how to get to the quarterback.
Okay. Another need that I think the Falcons may or may not want to address, just because they need a body there. They were the only team in the league last year that had all 5 of their offensive line starters start all 16 games. But the chances of that happening again are probably reasonably low. I think it's only the 3rd time in the last 20 years where the Falcons have had an offensive line do that. So, they do need to address maybe the depth at offensive tackle. Charles, are you in favor of maybe taking a day 3 guy to fill that swing tackle spot?
Yeah, definitely. I know that the Falcons recently worked out Julian Davenport from Bucknell. I think that will be a really good fit behind Jake Matthews and Ryan Schrader. And, I don't know how popular this opinion is, but I wouldn't be opposed to signing a guy to potentially start at left tackle in the future and let Jake Matthews walk. That's something that, Andrew Parsons and I have talked about. Just because, Jake he's a solid player, but he does tend to get bullied versus the run and by power rushers in pass pro. So I wouldn't be opposed to them taking a guy that they think can start in the future and maybe even push Jake Matthews in a year or two. And I think Julian Davenport could be a guy like that.
That sounds very blasphemous to me.
Put that out there. Good player, man. He fit the bill for what you look for as one of these small school prospects coming in, just dominating. I called a game where they played Georgetown, and Georgetown's defensive line had a lot of strength up front. They run a 3-3-5, and they gave everyone they faced problems all season long. And some bigger schools, but once they got up against Julian Davenport, he pretty much was able to hold his own. They ran a lot toward him, weak side. So when you're running weak side, it says a lot about what you're doing as a left tackle.
Emory, I'm curious, do you sort of see any other sort of day 3 sort of sleeper guys that have that sort of athleticism that you're looking for to run the outside zone scheme beyond a guy like Davenport, who's people have been talking about him getting pushed up maybe even into day 2 range just because it's a thin tackle class and he's one of those guys that has all those tools that you look for.
Well, 2 guys that I really like, Storm Norton out of Toledo. As an outstanding. I think people are really sleeping on him, and he's someone, obviously I'm talking about because he graded out high for me, but he graded out as my number, 2 tackle. I really like what he does. At 6'8", he is very flexible. He doesn't play high, and he's great in a running game. Also has good athleticism, so he's one that probably will be available on day 3. And you also look at another tackle that played in the East-West Shrine game, in Diego Joseph out of Florida International. Another very good athlete, gets good knee bend, and another one that does a great job going left to right. And that's where I think he's better. He can give up a little bit when people are coming right at him because he has to find a way to hurry up and quickly reset. But as far as the left to right movement, they ran a lot of what you're going to see the Falcons run at FIU. So he's another one that would be a really good fit.
All right. Scott, this has been a show that's been low on the Karasik take, so I'll give you the floor if you feel like you have something that you feel like in terms of additional needs that you want to see the Falcons address.
I mean, at this point, I'd just love to see a third running back who could come in and be that kick returner, like a Tariq Cohen. I think that would be just the perfect move they could make. Take him in like the 5th or 6th round. They obviously don't have a 6th-round pick right now, but who's to say they don't trade down a couple spots in the 2nd like they did last year and pick one up, or trade down a couple spots in the 3rd and pick one up. So I think it would work out real well. Get a guy like Tariq Cohen, go from there. I think that's the only other thing that hadn't really been covered.
Okay. Well, I feel like we really hit up all the needs. I don't I'm looking at my list. I don't see any other positions that I feel like necessarily need to be discussed heavily. I do think the Falcons are in a sort of unique position where they don't have that many pressing needs, and they can sort of afford to take some of the best players available. I don't necessarily look at a position like running back or wide receiver as something that they have to address. But if there's a talented player that sort of slides in this draft, and I wouldn't have a problem with the Falcons taking a guy that they can sort of stash at those two spots and sort of develop him for a year or two before they really have to need him to contribute. So with that being said, I think we're a little bit ready to move into the mailbag questions. Emory and Charles, you feel like sticking around and answering some of these listener questions?
Got to get the people what they want, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, I got a few in me. Let's
okay. Okay. All right. So with the 31st pick at Patrick Jeffers on Twitter, he asked, why do so many people think the Falcons need an offensive guard in the first? It's like they're surprised that Chris Chester retired. And similar question on that same line, I guess the opposite side of that coin, is Evan Birchfield asked, do you think Chester retiring changed the Falcons draft plans, or was it expected?
I think Thomas Dimitrov's comments in the last few weeks made it seem like they kind of expected he was going to retire. So I think that was always going to be one of their higher priorities. And even if he had stayed, he's like 34, 35 years old. It's not like he was going to stick around for. I mean, he probably wasn't going to stick around after this year, even if he had played. So I don't really think it changed their plans at all.
Yeah, I'm with that. I don't think it was ever going to be anything different. I think they planned on having an offensive guard. Like, I don't think they need an offensive guard in the first specifically, just because if you look at NFL depth charts, you see so many different guys on these NFL depth charts that started out as second or third round picks. So you can get a good guard in the second or third round, but I do think that they were expecting it. I do think one of their top 3 picks is going to be that starting rank guard.
Emory, you have thoughts?
Well, if you got an opportunity to take the best one, I would say go ahead on it and grab that right away and let everybody else fight for what could possibly be solid players. But if you have the best one right there at your disposal, go ahead on and grab them up.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I feel like this draft is shaping up where there's a lot of good guards that they could take high. I don't necessarily feel like the Falcons feel compelled to have to take a guy that high, because I do think they have a little bit more confidence in Wes Schweitzer than maybe Charles has a little bit more confidence in him. But I do think this draft sort of lines up where two of the areas of somewhat need are areas of the draft where there's good talent, and that's the guard position, that's the edge group. More of a general question comes from Evan Birchfield. He says, is Garrett a lock as the Browns' first pick?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of seems that way since the combine, and they already said they weren't trading out of it. And there were reports like during the season that the Browns had an astronomical grade, like quote unquote, on Garrett. So I mean, I don't know if I would do it just because you haven't had a quarterback in so long, but I think it's set in stone that they're going to take him number 1.
Yeah, I just don't think Garrett's that good, and I felt the same way about Barkevious Mingo, and I thought he had better tape than what Garrett put out when he was coming out of LSU. I just think that Garrett is a tremendous athlete, just not there as a football player. So, I think when you have a great athlete, you tend to want to see what you want to see, kind of like how Malik McDowell is seen. But as far as like football skills, they're not there yet. First round talent, possibly. Top 1, nah. Top 1, you expect they got to come in and dominate. And I don't think, that's his game. I think, quite honestly, at number 2, he would go perfectly in San Francisco because now you have him behind a guy like Ahmad Brooks. But next year, when Ahmad Brooks is like 35, something like that, now you have Aaron Lynch and Myles Garrett and what will probably be a 4-3. I mean, that to me, that would be the ideal spot for him. But the Browns, like Charles said, they need a quarterback. And why chance it and think and wait until 12 when 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, maybe another team in there can all take a quarterback, not counting the guys that could jump up and grab one. So I would say take the quarterback and play around with the rest of the draft like that.
Scott, you got to take?
Emory basically just hit it on the nose. You're picking number 2 overall because you need a quarterback and because, your team is just lacking talent. So take your quarterback. If you're picking number 1, yeah, you take Garrett because you've got 4 guys you might want to take at 12, but at 2, you got to take a quarterback. Garrett's got an astronomical grade. He ain't going anywhere but number 1.
Yeah, I don't. It just seems like the Browns, their free agency would suggest that they're going to take a quarterback fairly high. They signed Zeitler and Treader, Kenny Britt. They have 2 good running backs in Crowell and Duke Johnson, and they got Corey Coleman in the first round last year. Just take the guy at number 1 and then pick another defensive lineman at 12 is what I would do. But from all the reports, it sounds like they're locked into Garrett at 1.
That'll be so dumb, man. I'll be so upset because you just drafted Agba, you have Schobert, you have Nassib, you got Tyrone Holmes, you got Meter that can get pressure on the inside. You just re-signed Jamie Collins. You're not a Myles Garrett away from going to the damn playoffs. They need offense, and I think I don't want to hijack the topic, but I just don't think. I think people don't understand how a good offense can help out a defense. I think
we saw last year with Atlanta.
Exactly, like we saw with the greatest show on turf. Their defense was 16th in the league, but they just beat everybody. You had to score 35 points to beat the Rams, and so I think, especially when you're able to put points up on the board and chew up the clock, your defense is well rested, and you can generate pass rush. Blitzing is just about attitude and want to. It's not about adding the right blitzer or something like that. I think a lot of people are just looking at it different. I hope the Browns do the right thing by America and take the quarterback. But please, if you're watching this, Browns take the quarterback.
America needs a win.
But if they want to get a guy like Mahomes at 12 or Deshaun Watson at 12, that will more than likely be there.
Well, how do you know? That's the thing.
You don't know, so they might have to trade up. They've got the equity in the draft to trade up and get their guy if they really wanted to from 12 to, say, 6. Because there's not going to be 2 quarterbacks in the first 5 picks.
But you don't know. I mean, we saw a draft last year that had Goff and Wentz go 1 and 2. NFL is stupid. So, I mean.
And I hate to say it this way, Emory, but the NFL also doesn't seem to like black quarterbacks for some reason.
You're just preaching to the choir.
I know. But and 3 of the top 4 quarterbacks are black.
You're right. That's why they say this class is not good. So
that's why one of them's going to fall to 12th. And I hate to say it that way, but
Dang, you're right. I can't argue that. You're right. History has shown that that's the case.
You're not going to see 3 guys go in the top 12 without one of them being Trubisky. Just going to put it that way. Even though Trubisky probably shouldn't be a first-round pick.
Whole nother show.
Yeah, look, I hear what you guys are saying, but I do think the Browns are locked in at Garrett at number 1. I think they're, it seems like they're set up either to take a quarterback at 12 or to trade a bunch of picks to get Jimmy Garoppolo. Whether you think that's a good move or not, but it seems like they've set up their offseason that's their options at quarterback. Whether that's the right decision to go, that's certainly worthy of debate. But it seems like that's exactly where they're headed at. Okay. Evan Birchfield asks, does what we do in the draft affect Dwight Freeney's chances of coming back, or would you think he'd return before the draft?
No, I don't think he's coming. He's kind of like in that Brett Favre stage of his career. He was like, I ain't doing this off-season training camp. Call me up when you need someone to rush a pass in the regular season. And I don't think that's the direction that Dan Quinn necessarily wants to go with. He wants somebody who's going to be there for the entire offseason. And I don't think Dwight Freeney's coming back.
Yeah, I think the Falcons plan on taking an edge high. And if they do, then that pretty much kills any chance of Freeney coming back. Because I think, with Reed and Claiborne and Beasley, and then, a first or second round pick, Freeney, at that point you're like, and it's not to diminish Dwight Freeney, who's a player I love and who's a player I wanted the Falcons to sign 4 years ago. So, I wouldn't be against bringing him back, but it doesn't seem like that's in the Falcons' plans. Now, if they don't get the edge that they want in the draft, then I think it's a possibility that, they look at their defensive end group heading into training camp and they might give Dwight Freeney a call. But I think at this point in time, the plan is to take a young guy and sort of move forward. Okay. We got 2 questions related to double dipping at the DN spot. One comes from the Big Aristotle at Common Thought, and the other one comes from Javon Sims. Common Thought thing asked, do you think it's in the Falcons' best interest to double down on edge guys this year? And Javon asked, does the signing of Hugh Thornton indicate a possible double dip at the DN spot?
I don't think Hugh Thornton's good enough to say that he's going to force that double dip. So I'm going to go with no. But I would love to see a double dip just because you can never have enough good pass rushers. Although I'd rather see like a Tano Passignon and then get like a Willis or a Rivers or someone like that in the first and then a Tano Passignon in the second or third and do it that way. But I don't think you need to I think you need a strong side end who can also play that 4-eye or that 3-tech, and then you need a guy who can do the true edge.
I like Deshaun Hall too. I think he would be a good fit out of Texas A&M, and DeMarcus Walker I think would be a good one too. If people like Solomon Thomas, I think Walker is a better player and can play that 4-eye or even 5-tech if need be. And I think that'll be someone that I would go after if I were Atlanta, if you're talking about double dip.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely like to see, Derek Rivers and Tano both in Falcons uniforms next year. So, but I still think you need to get a guard. Hugh Thornton, he's not doing anything because he's probably gonna be hurt in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm not as big a fan of the double dip. Well, it depends. I got to give a caveat because it depends on what type of edges that you're getting. If you're getting 2 pure edges, like in the sort of, the Claiborne Beasley sort of mold, then I'm not that big a fan. You got to get 2 guys. You can get one guy that's an edge guy that can line up across from Beasley and get after the quarterback, and then that second guy has to do something a little bit different. In terms of maybe he is that base guy that plays in base and then kicks inside on nickel, or maybe he's, a linebacker that can sort of drop into coverage and be a little bit more of a linebacker than a true edge. But I just don't think if you're going to use a high pick on a pass rusher on an edge like that, like a Derek Rivers or a Charles Harris or somebody like that early, then I don't feel like you need to go back in round 3 or round 4 and get another guy unless he's going to do something different. Because I just think you're spending a lot of draft capital on a position that you should be at that point pretty good at. So unless a guy's going to bring a whole lot more else to the table, and I think you can sort of do what some of these other teams have done with, you look at a guy like Shaq Barrett, you look at guys like Jacquez Smith or Mario Addison, some of these guys that were undrafted guys that teams were able to get in the undrafted market and sort of develop as that third guy, that backup sort of guy behind the sort of the more of the high profile guys like the Shane Rays and the Coney Ewes and whatnot. So I think that probably would be a better strategy for the Falcons in terms of if they're going to double dip at the edge group in this draft, as opposed to using 2 high picks on that position. But if you can get 2 guys that can do different things, and I'm not going to say it's a bad move, but yeah. One
guy I think Falcons fans should keep an eye on it and really pay attention to is Keontae Davis out of Chattanooga. Davis can play your standard 4-3 defensive end, He's 6'4", about 275, and I think he can grow into about 285, 290, and play inside in situations. He can play that now at 275 at about 6'4". So he's one that I think you should definitely keep an eye on coming out of Chattanooga. Strong, very strong hands, and he's one that I know the Falcons are strongly interested in.
Okay. Our next question comes from Charlie Rogers. Yes, it appears the Falcons like Forrest Lamp a lot. Gut feeling is that they would have to move in front of Seattle. Is he worth it? According to the trade value chart, Falcons would have to trade a 3 to the Texans at 25 to get Lamp. What are your thoughts if this scenario happens? Are there any positions or are there any edge players the Falcons should look at? I think they're thinking edge in round 2.
I mean, I wouldn't hate trading up for Lamp because it's basically like trading up for Zach Martin. But I get why it wouldn't make sense if you're just like, oh, the edge in round 2 aren't what they're supposed to be. And I'm going to borrow a term from Chuck's partner on Setting the Edge. Edges are quarterbacks. Get your best possible edge in round 1. And if you can find a guy, if I'm going to make that trade up, I'm going to trade up and see if like Derek Barnett's falling. And I would trade up for him, or I'd trade up for like Hassan Reddick or a Solomon Thomas, randomly falling on draft day. Like that's the trade I would make.
What are you guys' thoughts on Forrest Lamp?
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to trading up for Forrest Lamp. I mean, he played tackle primarily at Western Kentucky, and I mean, if you go back and watch the Alabama game, he had a great game against highly touted guys like John Allen and Tim Williams. But obviously, if he's coming into the Falcons, he's going to be a right guard because they already have investments at left tackle, left guard, and right, like every other position besides right guard. So, I mean, at the Senior Bowl, he was only there for one day, but when he was inside in the pass pro drills and some of the other drills, he looked really good and he played really well. So I know it's a small sample size, but I think athletically he can do it. So if the Falcons think that's their guy, from what we've heard since the Combine, like, they met with him at the Combine and seemed really interested, and they just had a workout with him the other day, or was that today? I would not have a problem with them trading up to get him, as long as it's not like an egregious move, like to go like from 31 to 15 or something like that.
Yeah, and it's a shame that Tando Pasio ended his Senior Bowl career on that one play for us, kind of like put the man in the dirt. But I kind of like Deion Dawkins better than Forrest Lamp. So, and I know Dawkins, tremendous athlete, played left tackle at Temple, and then they had him playing inside at guard at the Senior Bowl. So I think he could be that versatile swing player that you look for. I'm not big on trading up, because I'm of the mindset that, hey, I trust my scouts, I trust my evaluation. At most I would move up one spot, but other than that, like, okay, you took this guy, well, I know this guy can play just as good as this one. So I would say Deion Dawkins would be one that, if you miss out on one of those top tier O linemen, he'll be around the second or third round that you could take and get a guy that has tremendous athleticism and versatility.
Well, I knew there was a reason I liked Emory, because I'm not a big fan of trading up either. I think you go back through draft history, you can certainly use the Julio trade as an exception, but generally speaking, when teams trade up for players, particularly early, it usually does not work out too well for them. People aren't talking about, oh man, that Deion Jordan pick, that really worked out for Miami, huh? Yeah. But yeah, I like Lamp a lot. I've been a big fan of Lamp since I think last year when I think it was LSU that they played, and he had a pretty good game against them. So I do see him as a really good guard, and he would be a player I would love the Falcons to get. I don't quite see him on the same level as Zach Martin, but I do think he may be a tier or so below that. But I do think this is a deep enough guard, or at least a top-heavy enough guard group, that I wouldn't necessarily feel like it's worth it for me to give up a third-round pick or something to go up and get Lamp when I can get a guy like Feeney or Dorian Johnson or Deion Dawkins or some of these other guards, either at 31 or later at 63. I just don't think Lamp is that far and away better than the other guys to merit sort of giving up another asset to do so. But yeah, if the Falcons did do that, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but it just wouldn't be exactly my plan of action, I guess.
And Jordan Morgan is another good one too, out of Kutztown. I think he had a really good week at the Senior Bowl, but his tape is phenomenal.
Okay. Yeah, I can't scrounge up too much Kutztown tape, so I'll have to take your word for that.
How many more questions do we have?
We got a bunch, but if you want to duck out, Charles, I'm not going to hold it against you. I know you have that short attention span.
No, I got some homework to do. I'm still in school. I'm still a youngin', so I gotta get to my schoolwork. This has been fun though.
All right. Appreciate it, Charles.
Anytime.
Go ahead and plug. I know you want to plug your podcast.
Oh, yeah, we have Setting the Edge podcast at Setting Edge on Twitter. If you follow now and retweet, we are giving away 2 copies of. There's a tweet posted on the account. If you go follow that, retweet it, you have a chance to win Matt Waldman's RSP draft guide. He gave us 2 copies to give away. So if you would be interested in that, just follow the account and retweet it. 5 stars only on iTunes. If it's not 5 stars, we're not interested. And yeah, that's it. We'll be having Sigmund Bloom on Sunday. We've already had Emory on. We might have Scott on if Fusuvu declines their invite because Scott came in second place in the worst tweeter bracket. And we're gonna have
very much.
And we're gonna have Chris Burke on the week after. So definitely go check that out. Setting the Edge. And our Bleacher Report NFL 1000 Falcons draft guide should be hitting the internet streets in a few days. So be on the lookout for that too.
I hope they let you write it and not someone else.
I just wrote the defensive tackles, so anything else is up for free game.
All right. Well, Charles, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Emory, are you willing to stick around for a few more questions?
Sure, why not?
All right. I think this next one's going to be an interesting one. Javon Sims asks, if Peppers falls to 31, is he the selection or a potential move to linebacker?
I think he would be a selection, but I don't think he would be the move to linebacker. I think they'll play him. He would be the piece that, okay, we need you to play this role on this particular down. I think he's that type of player. I wouldn't relegate him to a position, although I think he's a strong safety through and through. He's not a linebacker because linebackers are supposed to take on blocks. You don't want him doing that because he won't. But if you need him to shoot a gap, if you need him blitz, if you need him close off a rush lane, he definitely can do that. If you need him to match up one-on-one versus a back, he can do that. Tight end, he can hold his own. So I think he is a matchup player. So you get him, you're getting a versatile guy, plus you're also getting a returnman. I like his talent. I just wouldn't relegate him to one particular position, but I know I wouldn't play him at linebacker.
And I wouldn't play him at strong safety because they got Keanu Neal. So to me, that's like, why would you take him? I think if Peppers is there, that might be a good trade down opportunity with someone who does like him a little bit more. But personally, I don't think the Falcons should take him.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Jabril Peppers. I do think he's a good player, but I just don't feel like the player that you just described, Emory, which I think is sort of the best usage of him, which is sort of this versatile piece, is necessarily what you want in a first-round pick. Because I think when a first-round pick, you want a guy that's going to come in right away and fit a role and fill a major need for your position. And Peppers seems to be more of that sort of guy that you're going to come in and sort of use as a movable chess piece. That certainly has value, but I just don't think that's as valuable as, say, if you want a true strong safety, then you go out and you get a guy like Obi Melifonwu at that point in the draft. Or if you want a free safety and you want a Budda Baker, or you want a true linebacker, you get a Zach Cunningham or Jared Davis or something like that. Like, I feel like those players that are going to fit that true role in your defense have just a little bit more value and a little bit more potential worth as a first round pick. But in the second round, if the Falcons, say in that scenario, Scott says the Falcons were to trade back into the second round, I'd be a little bit more open to sort of taking a flyer on Peppers and sort of using him as a chess piece, because I feel like at that point in the draft, you can sort of gamble on his upside and sort of his value in that capacity. Okay. Evan's next question is: what's a position not being talked about that the Falcons could draft?
Probably running back.
As Scott mentioned, running back. Let's say receiver for a second, right? And I know they have Julio Jones, but I feel like Julio Jones gets hurt every other play, right? And it's always an ankle, and then he comes back in, and he catches a touchdown, but then he's out because it's an ankle. And it's weird. It's like Delvin Breaux of the Falcons. Like every game, Delvin Breaux gets carted off with a neck, and then comes back and plays next week. Like it's weird for the Saints, but I would say the Falcons have solid receivers. I like Julio. I like Gabriel. I like the young cat out of East Carolina. That's on the roster. I think he's going to develop into a good, piece for Atlanta. I'm not a Mohamed Sanu guy, but let's say if they wanted to add a receiver late, let's say a new Roddy White type receiver. I like Chad Williams out of Grambling. I think he'd be a good fit in Atlanta. So that's like a later round. If you've answered all your questions and got all your needs early on, and now you're at the point where you're taking special teamers and a guy that you like skill-wise that you want to work with, I think Williams would be a good fit.
So what are your thoughts on a guy like TJ Logan is kind of that like running back, wide receiver, kind of do-it-all type?
I'm not as high on TJ Logan. I would think if that's the case and you get he's not the receiver probably, but he's a guy that brings a different element to the game, and that's you mentioned Tariq Cohen, but I like Donnell Pumphrey too out of San Diego State. He's another one of those guys that you can probably get later, has experience returning kicks and things of that nature, can play that special teams role. And I think he would be a good fit. You also look at maybe a guy like Joe Williams that has that explosiveness, another one that has played returner, and also Elijah McGuire from the University of Louisiana. How could I not, pub him up? But that's one that I would think would be a lot better to me than a guy like TJ Logan.
Yeah. You guys named the positions I probably would have named. So, Evan Birchfield's next question is: who are some dark horses that nobody is talking about? I know, Emory, this is sort of where you specialize in terms of some of these draft prospects that aren't getting enough pub.
Well, let's keep it specific to what the Falcons need. So let's say guard. I'm a big fan of Ethan Cooper out of Indiana University of Pennsylvania. He's a really good interior offensive lineman. We talked about Jordan Morgan, Jessamine Dunker out of Tennessee State. They produce some really good.
That man is good.
He is awesome with coaching those offensive linemen. They are stout. So Dunker is a good one who also had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. Corner, I talked about Titus Howard and Brendan Langley, Rasul Douglas. I'm glad Scott brought up Tariq Cohen. He's one of my favorite players in the draft. That's a piece that I think that's the type of player the Falcons would take. I think those some guys, man. If you're looking at linebacker, edge, a versatile guy, Folarin Orumalade out of Dartmouth. And this is a guy that started out as an outside linebacker. He's about 5'11", 260, tremendous pass rusher. And then this season, he dropped weight, got to about 235, 240, moved inside, and excelled there as well, too. So he was able to bring pressure from the inside, showed the ability to drop back in coverage. He has good sideline-to-sideline speed, and he's a versatile backer that can play in a 3-4 or 4-3. And he is one that I know had a ton of buzz coming this past pro day. He had like 18 scouts up there at Dartmouth Pro Day. But he is one that no one's talking about. He graded out high for me, graded out as my second inside linebacker because he's so versatile and because he dropped that weight and because he's able to move and cover and blitz from outside or in. I think that's one that no one is talking about. That's a really good football player.
Yeah.
And it's always the backup quarterback, right? They need a backup quarterback. Phillip Walker right there at Temple. Plays the pro game real well. No one's talking about him. I think the Falcons can't stand to get better behind Matt Ryan.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
Evan Birchfield asks, today everybody went crazy about Richard Sherman. Can you explain to Falcon fans why this is a bad or good idea?
It would be stupid. It would be absolutely stupid. You don't need a corner. I know Emory wants them to take a corner, blah, blah, blah. He's a Saints fan. But the Falcons don't need a corner. So going out and getting Richard Sherman as Richard Sherman starting to decline doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's
Richard Sherman, great corner.
It's because he's on the back end, you know. He's what, 29?
28, I think.
He's 29, but you can easily see something going down.
Yeah, he's got a little Darrelle Revis in him, where when the wheels fall off, they're gonna fall off pretty hard with Richard Sherman at some point. I don't know, maybe it's 31, maybe it's 32. I don't know where it is, but yeah, I think in a vacuum, if you're talking about putting Richard Sherman on this football team, I'd be in favor of it, just because you can put him on the outside across from Trufant, you can move Alford into the slot, and then you have the best trio of cornerbacks in the NFL. But it's not in a vacuum. You're getting a 28, maybe 29-year-old cornerback that's entering probably the last 2 or 3 sort of peak years in his career. You're going to inherit $11 million in cap space, and that's really a situation the Falcons can't afford at this point. And because he's entering, I think he's got maybe 2 years left on his contract, he's going to want a new deal. So you're going to have to give up, a high pick, presumably a first or second round pick. I can't really imagine Seattle trading him for much less than that. And then you're going to have to pay him on top of that $60, $70 million. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for the Falcons, in particular, just because they have, Trufant, who's in the prime of his career. They have Robert Alford, who's basically the same age as Richard Sherman. Maybe a very poor man's Richard Sherman, I guess. You have Collins coming up. You have other guys in your depth where you're trying to get those guys developed. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the Falcons to give up what they would have to give up to get Richard Sherman. I understand why people are like, "Oh, Richard Sherman's an elite corner. Bring him to the team; he'll help the team." But it doesn't make sense for the Falcons to pull a move like that. Maybe the Saints, but they need all the help at cornerback they can get. So
the Saints do need him.
Saints do need help. Like I said, Dalvin Breaux breaks his neck every week and gets carted off and is back to the next week. And it's weird. PJ Williams, I don't think has played yet. Didn't he break his neck too? So I mean, again, the Saints need corner help. Wouldn't be surprised.
And a neck surgeon.
Huh?
And probably a neck surgeon.
Exactly. So the Saints, to me, that's the clear pick for the Saints at number 11. They're going corner. If they don't go corner, well, I'm tripping. Sean Payton, they're gonna take a receiver or a running back and not use them.
Unfortunately, yeah, you're probably right.
Well, as long as it's not Christian McCaffrey, I don't want that dude in the NFC South.
Then give the ball to some undrafted free agent from Central Tiffin and let him run the ball, and McCaffrey sit there and collect dust on the sideline.
Central Tiffin. It's like, where's that even located?
Javon Sims' next question is, I'm in Baltimore and there are rumors Terrell Suggs might be a surprise cut. Should the Falcons be interested?
If they don't take a guy in the first round and they don't really take a guy in the second round, I don't see why not. I think Suggs could play that strong side linebacker in the base, and obviously he can pass rush, so why not?
I'm a big fan of T. Sizzle, but, at this point I'm not taking him over just bringing back Dwight Freeney at this point. So, I wouldn't be in favor of this move.
Yeah, you got Freeney on speed dial and pretty much on call. Like, we need a pass rusher for the week. Freeney has shown he's able to get up off the couch and get after the quarterback. So, and he knows the system already. I think, that's a good bet to keep playing that game with Freeney as opposed to getting Suggs.
Yeah. I mean, Sizzle would be great for post-game press conferences and sort of sound bites and whatnot, because he's an amazing television personality. But other than that, I don't think he's bringing anything to the table more than what Freeney is. Mark Lee asked, would you want Dan Quinn to hire an in-game strategist or a clock manager to apprise him after the stuff that has happened in these first 2 years?
No, I think experience is the best teacher. I think he is going to make a point to have a handle on what's going on. I think that's something where you see a lot of coaches, that are first-time head coaches struggle with the game management part because they still are thinking like position coaches or coordinators. And I think that is what happened, in this early tenure with Dan Quinn. I think the game of that magnitude, losing that game, it's not like a Mike Smith situation where you kind of bungled up the clock situation. This was the Super Bowl, and I think that right there is going to be like, you know what? I need to worry about this. I need to trust my position coaches, my coordinators to do what I paid them to do, and I'm going to hold down this game management, clock management, and personnel management, and leave it at that.
Scott?
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's exactly what he needs to do. He needs to figure that shit out on his own. I mean, there's books about it. He could probably call up Bill Parcells and be like, "Hey, Bill, how do you do this?" I mean, he worked under Parcells. He called him up before he became the Falcons coach and was like, "Hey, how do I build a brotherhood?" Why not do that with Bill Parcells? Like, "Hey, how do I manage a game? How do I clock manage a game?" Call up Mariucci. Call up all these guys.
It's all about delegation, man. And that's where I see it all the time at the college level where, guys can't let go of that position coach because, you want to feel like you still have a purpose on a team and not just a figurehead or a motivational guy. You just want to, hey, I'm a running backs coach. I want to coach my running backs this way. And you forget about everything else going on, but you can't do that because you are the head coach, not a position coach.
And that's what he did the first year because he was still coaching the defensive line. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't work.
I mean, you see Sean Payton go with that situation a lot, want to live vicariously through Drew Brees and mismanage situations by throwing the football when they should run and constantly want to keep his foot on the gas, not understanding, situational football. And that's where he has gotten the Saints in a lot of trouble because he can't let go of, I used to be an offensive coordinator, I want to call plays. And when he had his best year, when the Saints won the Super Bowl, they had someone calling plays. I think Cromer was it. And Sean Payton was more of the head coach. But ego is big when you're at that level,
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I don't think the in-game strategy. I know, obviously, given the situation of the Super Bowl, it was a big deal. But I don't think it's as big a deal. I think certainly any NFL coach could benefit from having somebody in there that can sort of help them out there. But I don't necessarily feel like it's necessary. I do think Dan Quinn will be able to figure it out on his own. Not to say that he won't ever make him a game management situation a mistake in the future, because even guys like Belichick screw that up from time to time. So it's not as if it's the end of the world if it happens. It's one of those things that happens in the NFL, and I think people have a tendency to make it a bigger deal than what it is. But it's something that coaches can work on, and I think he will do that. Okay, Damian Horn asks, Devontae Freeman and Taylor Gabriel, what is their potential contracts amounts?
Oh.
If you don't have an answer for that, I guess I'll rephrase the question. Who would you prefer to give a contract to, I guess?
I mean, I'd prefer to give a contract to Devontae Freeman, but I do think that they're both going to get signed long term. If I'm paying them just off the top of my head, I'd offer Freeman 5 years, $40 million, and structure it to a way where you can cut him after three or four. If he falls off, you just let him go. Gabriel, $525. I think that's what he's worth. I think that's what a top-range slot receiver is really worth in the NFL today. You give him any more, you're just wasting money. You let him go to somewhere else who's going to give him way too much money to do what they think he can. They would think that he's Antonio Brown if they're giving him more than that. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I'm paying Freeman. I mean, Freeman was the MVP of that Super Bowl and probably should have gotten the ball a hell of a lot more. And plus, the reason why you pay Freeman is because I don't think Coleman is that dude behind him. He's good at what they're asking him to do. And God forbid you lose Freeman and have to rely on Coleman, Coleman is not that dude that's going to give you what Freeman does. Coleman benefits from Freeman, but Freeman benefits from Freeman himself. And I think that's the one you pay. I think you could find, I hate to say it, but you could find a lot of Taylor Gabriels out there and use them creatively to get you what he was able to do for Atlanta last year. But Freeman, I love the way he runs the football.
I think you can find another Taylor Gabriel even in this draft in Isaiah McKenzie.
Or even in Curtis Samuel and get the same things you get from Taylor Gabriel.
Yeah. I'd be with you on that. In terms of dollar amounts, I don't know. I would assume, Freeman's contract would be much bigger than Gabriel's contract, just because of, he's as Emory and Scott said, he's the better player. I guess, I would probably choose Devontae Freeman. I think, the one thing I will say about Gabriel is there aren't very many good 5'8" wide receivers in the NFL, and Gabriel is the exception to that. So I will give him that much credit in terms of, replacing him may not be as easy. But then again, he's more of an exception as opposed to the rule. And so maybe you get a 5'11" guy or something like that can sort of do what he does. I would certainly choose Freeman over Gabriel in that situation.
The 5'8" guy that got the opportunity, because there's a bunch of, when Gabriel came out, there was another guy from West Texas A&M that was just as good. I forgot which team he played for. Crap, but he was the same guy. I know.
Kendrick West or whatever.
It was a receiver. Now it's gonna bug me, but there's a bunch of these guys you can find at the lower levels, especially now with the spread offense. Sam Houston says he's gonna have 3 of them next year. So if it's all about it's all about the NFL not being stupid and giving guys that can play ball opportunities. And that's why Gabriel's he's like, hey, I might as well continue to strike while the iron hot while they're giving me this opportunity before they think they can get a 6'4" guy to do the same thing. So, he just has to – there's a bunch of good guys out here that can do it. It's just about getting that opportunity.
It's funny that you say that because that's exactly what they did in Cleveland. They were like, oh, we got all these 6'4" receivers. We don't need Taylor Gabriel.
And you let a football player walk out the door. I swear the NFL is stupid. The NFL does this on purpose. That's how you have parity, by forcing teams to make dumb decisions.
And Aaron wonders where I get the NFL is fucking stupid takes online. Like, we were sitting there one year right before the Senior Bowl, and we were just sitting there eating dinner, and Emory and I were talking like, oh my God, I can't believe the NFL is going to do this. And we were hearing shit at the Senior Bowl like, there's no way they're going to do that. And then on draft day, they did it. Like, you were just like, how dumb can you be?
It's amazing.
Trading up.
I don't disagree with you, Scott. The NFL is not a well-run organization in terms of there aren't 32 competent head coaches. There definitely aren't 32 competent GMs. I might get to my second hand in counting the competent GMs in the NFL. So,
And Atlanta has one of them.
Yeah, maybe.
I think we've seen he's built 2 different regimes with 2 different coaches. As long as he's got a coach that has a vision, he's good.
Look, I won't badmouth Dimitrov too much. I think he got lost in the weeds there for about 4 years. I certainly think he's capable of being good, as he showed early in his career and in these last couple of years. So he is certainly capable of being competent. One of the reasons why I was so hard on him during that 4-year run in the middle there. But we got more. He asked, would you draft a wide receiver? I think we answered that. But his follow-up is, what type of receiver and when?
Obviously, I would say later, because Falcons have good depth at receiver. But I like a Roddy White type clone. You know what I'm saying? So I like that Chad Williams. I like that Carell Hamilton out of Sanford. I like that Krishawn Hogan out of Marion. Those guys are bigger guys that you can move around and get creative with, but they have that frame and they play big. I think, because to me, I'm looking at it from the scope that I'm trying to move Mohamed Sanu out the paint. So I'm finding some of his replacements. But I think a bigger physical receiver is what I would do if I were getting a receiver late.
I tend to agree with that. Give me a guy who is that bigger, more physical receiver. I'm even open to a guy like a Ricky Seals-Jones, who's like 245 pounds and Just has that big body that you can throw in there. A Mac Hollins out of North Carolina would be fun. Even if you can, like, if Jalen Robinette falls or if Robert Davis somehow falls, Robert Davis would be fun. He's big, he's fast. I'm not saying he's the next Julio Jones, but athletically, he might be the next Dante Moncrief.
And he's a local kid, you know what I'm saying? You know, and he's from the Sun Belt Conference, so you can't go wrong with Sun Belt players, you know. Sun Belt football in the house.
Well, the big thing is he's a local kid, so he would definitely have a following here too.
Right.
Yeah, look, I'm not gonna lie. I'm all about the deep ball. So I want somebody who can stretch the field. I'm in the boat for getting that guy that can sort of do what Aldrick Robinson did last year. I'm all about the big play. I feel like I've been crying about the Falcons not being an explosive offense for like 7 years. They were finally that last year. So if you're going to get a wide receiver in this year's draft or really any year's draft, I'm all about the guy that can give you explosive plays. So whether that's after the catch or, you know, running past corners and blowing past, you know, Raphael Bush or whoever the Saints got at safety this year, that's the guy I want.
When that 40 number, like I saw that, I was like, yeah, they about to get toasted. You're already down 7-0 when you got a cornerback wearing the 40s. Like it's done. You done for.
So Aaron, a guy who's 6'3", 220 pounds, runs a 4.44. That's the kind of guy you want.
It works for me.
So that's Robert Davis.
You know what? You mentioned Texas A&M. Speedy Noyle is another one to keep an eye on. I mean, he's 5'11", pounds and explosive as hell, and he can. I think it's funny how Christian Kirk came in and kind of slowly made Speedy Noyle an afterthought, but he's still a really good football player. And he's from New Orleans, so.
Or even a Chris Godwin type in like the third round.
I mean, this is a good wide. I haven't watched the wide receivers as much as I normally would, just because the Falcons are pretty good at that spot. But everybody I've seen, I'm like, yeah, I kind of like that guy. Like, I saw a mock draft like last week that someone had Shelton Gibson from West Virginia going to the Falcons in like round 4 or something like that. And so I was like, who's this Shelton Gibson guy? And I just watched like 4 plays. And oh, he's fast. Check. I'll take
Josh Malone out of Tennessee in like the 5th round. I would love to have him. Again, 6'3", 210, runs a 4.4 flat. That's the kind of guy you want. You want a guy who can stretch the field, run straight ahead 40 yards and burn a corner. That's your guy.
All about getting Muhammad Sanu out the paint. Like, he has gotten by. You know, I don't know how he's done it. He is the Jacoby Jones of prospects. He's a Nate Burleson of prospects. He's like, yo, how are you still in the league? And you know what? People keep signing him to contracts. And next thing you know, he's gonna have a 12-year NFL career and be on TV.
I mean, I thought this past year was the best year that I've seen him. But they limited his role to basically, hey, you're a slow possession guy. You're basically a late run Anquan Bolden is how they used him.
Emory, you have made my year by talking trash on Muhammad Sanu. So I'm the same way. But, you know, people have been getting on me for the last year for talking about how he's not that good. But it's you can say it and you can get away with it because you're a Saints fan and you're speaking the truth. But, hey, what do I know?
Well, I know I'm going to get it this year because I know you know, I always has other Saints fans text me like, "Oh, you know, what you think about us signing Ted again?" I'm like, "What?" Oh my goodness! Yeah, they cut Brandon Cooks to get or trade Brandon Cooks to get Ted again. Perfect. That's
yeah. That was the dumbest shit ever.
That's Sean Payton ego. Crazy.
That's the nice way to put it. The difference between Sean Payton and Bobby Petrino isn't that much when you think about it.
Ego, man. Like, you have the Saints backfield last year. I want to say the year before last in that Cowboys game. Saints had Mark Ingram, C.J. Spiller, Kendall Hunter. But they wanted to give the ball to Travaris Cadet. It's like you got 3 explosive tailbacks and you rather feed the slowest one. You got Mark Ingram who has outstanding footwork, yet you want to feed Tim Hightower.
Tim Hightower's a cool dude, though.
He's a cool dude, but he ain't better than Ingram. And poor Spiller. Spiller was supposed to be the new. Here's your second Reggie Bush. Here's an opportunity to rectify the wrong you did earlier when you refused to give Reggie Bush the ball and wanted to give it to Pierre Thomas. So here's C.J. Spiller. We're going to give the ball to Travaris Cadet and Tim Hightower. Matter of fact, you stand next to Mark Ingram on the sideline. Y'all both watched Cadet and Hightower run the ball.
Let's put it this way. NFL coaches are fucking stupid sometimes. There's a reason why the Saints have gone 7-9 the last 3 years.
Because you got to get Breeze those records, man.
That's all he cares about. And it's
70 attempts a game. Keep both teams in it.
A lot of reasons why the Saints have gone 7-9 the last few years. I don't know if this show is long enough to go through them all, but that the mess that they've had at the tailback position is one of those reasons. So
you forget that Falcons Central Radio is also Saints Hatred Radio.
Man, and this goes way back. This this is something that I remember being 14 years old, 15 years old, wanting the Saints. Oh yeah, the Saints definitely going to. Saints had a great pick. Oh yeah, they're going to get Eddie George. They took Kyle Turley. The next year, you're like, all right, the Saints got to get work done. They take Chris Naoli. Like, you know what? Saints stuck with Mario Bates. It's like, wow. As a
Saints took Kenny Vaccaro.
Who's not bad. It's just that once you take off Sean Payton, he buries you. That he has turned Stephon Anthony into like the worst football player ever. And Stephon Anthony was made the all rookie team. But he must have said something to Sean Payton to where he's never going to play again. It is the dumbest stuff ever. That's why.
If y'all don't want Stephon Anthony, send him to Atlanta because I guarantee you, Dan Quinn could take Stephon Anthony and turn him into a good football player. Because he didn't just turn into a shitty football player overnight.
No, it's because it's a combination of Sean Payton's ego and a defensive coordinator that looks like you could just knock him out all the time. He is a defensive coordinator version of Kyle Shanahan. Just has a punchable posture.
So he's Kyle Shanahan without the intelligence, is what you're telling me.
He's Kyle Shanahan on defense.
No. Kyle Shanahan's actually a good coordinator, though.
Until you take him off, and then he does stuff sneakily, like gives Tevin Coleman more carries than Devonta Freeman in the Super Bowl.
I mean, that was dumb, but he should have just given Devonta Freeman more carries towards the end of the Super Bowl.
I got nothing to add to that.
I think Shanahan's a smarter coordinator than Allen is, though.
Shanahan he fell victim to Sean Payton disease. He wanted to make it about Matt Ryan. He wanted Matt Ryan to be the hero. Like, yo, just win the game. They're going to give it to Matt Ryan anyway. You know what I'm saying? Just win the game.
I mean, Matt Ryan already was the hero. He had thrown for 3 touchdowns and like 300 yards. I mean, what else could he have done?
Freeman was well on his way to 2 bills against that Patriots defense. And Shanahan was like, you know what? Nah, we're going to make this about it. It was going to be the whole Peyton situation where Dominic Rose should have got the MVP, but they gave it to Peyton. And Matt Ryan was going to get his due. Falcons was going to get that Super Bowl and was going to blow out New England. But Shanahan was like, nah, I got to look like the genius.
Ryan had 284 yards and 2 touchdowns and no picks and no fumbles. All they had to do was run the ball 3 times, not even gain a yard. Just run the ball 3 times and kick a field goal, and then you're up 11 with 2.5 minutes left.
I don't even
think Tom Brady can get
y'all on the show. Sorry, I opened up.
You ripped open the skin, Emory. You just ripped it wide open.
But I was frustrated for you guys because I hate dumb situational football. Like, that's the bane of my existence. I don't care who wins or who loses. Just don't play stupid. You know, just play the right way and just don't do nothing dumb. And I'm fine with it.
Well, we got a couple more questions so we can wrap this thing up. Javon Sims asks, I have the Falcons taking Derek Rivers just based off of need and style. Who is the best case scenario at pick 31, including a possible trade? Javon loves his trades.
I mean, Derek Barnett is probably your best possible scenario. even if you do have a small trade up. Outside of him, I mean, Forrest Lamp. It's either Forrest Lamp or Derek Barnett.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I mean, the Falcons are in the catbird seat. About 12 teams will do something ridiculous, so they're going to push at least 12 good players down. The Falcons are going to come away with a great pick at 31.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking the same way, Emory. That's why I haven't spent too many brain cells this offseason worrying about the Falcons pick. I feel like, the great thing about picking late in the first round, and generally speaking, people believe that the higher you pick, the better your pick is. And certain, depending on the draft class, that can sort of be somewhat true. Particularly if you're a bad team, you're trying to look for that premier player that typically goes in the top 10. I don't think this is really one of those draft classes where you really want to be picking high in the draft. I think you're sitting at a position at 31 where you're going to get a guy at a premium position like a edge rusher who may not be that next superstar, but is going to be a pretty good player. I think you're able to get some guys. You can get a superstar player at a non-premium position at 31. You go back a couple of years ago with Dallas taking Travis Frederick at that same pick. A lot of people laughed at that pick. Like, oh, Travis Frederick, he's a third-round center. Why are you taking him in the first round? And then, you look at the Cowboys laughing all the way to, the bank, so to speak. And I feel like the Falcons are in that same situation, potentially getting possibly the premier guard in this draft, maybe a guy like Forrest Lamp or an edge rusher or one of these other guys, because teams just look at certain positions like, oh, this is a first-round pick, this is a first-round pick. If someone winds up taking Jabril Peppers in the first round, more power to them. That's great for them. But I think that's going to help out the Falcons and push somebody that's a little bit more deserving of that notion down to them in round one. So, yeah.
Honest, the Falcons don't have a lot of holes, so it's really a situation where they could take a really good football player regardless of position. They don't have many. Think about it. We're talking about the right guard position. So the Falcons don't have many holes at all, I don't think.
Yeah. All right, Javon's last question is addressed to me. I don't really have an answer for you, Javon, because I haven't watched him. But he asks, what are your thoughts on Michigan State safety Monte Nicholson? He is growing on me. You guys have any takes on Monte Nicholson?
Just a guy. Fast guy, but just a guy.
I think he's okay. I was at the Maryland Michigan State game, and you kind of got confused between him and the other safety. I think the other safety is McNichols, or I have it right here. I'm bugging, but I think the other safety was the one that was better. Cox, Demetrius Cox. He was the better of the two, but they were strong on the back end more than what I saw from Malik McDowell and the rest of that deep. Maryland ran right through them, and two safeties were playing real well, but I like Cox a little bit more.
Yeah, Javon, I'll check out Nicholson at some point in time. What I've read about him doesn't sound great, but I'm not one of those people that's going to automatically judge a player just by what I've read about him. But I'll try to go and watch his film with an open mind. I'll give you an answer on next week's show, I guess.
Honestly, if there was a safety that I had to pick that was a little bit later, I'd pick Kai Nakua. Probably butchering the hell out of this dude's name. Out of Brigham Young.
Since you've touched a little bit on McDowell, Emory, what are your thoughts on this? We get a question from Sheldon Allen on Hangouts. He says, I'm really high on Malik McDowell. How similar of a player is he to Rashid Hageman?
That's an interesting comparison. Hageman is a better football player. McDowell is the better athlete. And that was what I kept coming away with, because I hadn't heard of McDowell prior to that particular game. I had just finished doing color, and I'm seeing everybody talking about McDowell in the first round. I was like, oh, well, snap. Maryland is, 15 miles away from Georgetown. So let me get up to this game. So I was excited to see him. I came in with a blank slate because I knew nothing about him. I just saw him being mocked in the top 10. And so I get there, and I'm waiting for him to make a play. And I'm like, wow, he's getting washed. He's getting blown off the ball. Can't get off a double team. But you can see the one or two times where he goes free, and maybe he'll hit a guy with a swim move, or he'll explode to the ball carrier, chase him down on the backside. I'm like, okay, he has good athleticism, but as far as like the tactical stuff, he's terrible at it, and he's not a good enough football player to overcome that, like we saw Malik Collins do for Nebraska, who had great ball get off, great awareness, but didn't have technique. And Dallas was able to coach up the technique, and they had an all-rookie defensive tackle. But Malik McDonald, to me, he has a long way to go. I know some people think he's an end. I think with his bowl of butcher knives type, chaos, he's probably better as a defensive tackle, where he can use his length to clog up a lane, slice through, and you hope someone can work with him to teach him technique. But you're hoping for a lot, because you would have thought at Michigan State he would have learned that in spades, because their corners and defensive players are usually technically sound. So that's why it was kind of throwing me off to see a guy with that much athleticism, with that poor technique at that particular program. So there's some upside, but he's someone that I would be cautioned to think I can turn an athlete into a football player.
I don't think he's coachable. Like that's my big question. I think that's going to be his downfall in the NFL too. His coaches are going to hate him and not want to do anything with him.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it all at that. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. We appreciate Emory for hanging out with us and probably talking more Falcons football than he ever has in his life. We appreciate that. Emory, go ahead and plug the various efforts and projects that you're working on right now.
Well, they can follow me on Twitter at FBallGamePlan. Check out our prospect rankings video. We graded out 532 prospects in this year's draft class, and we're talking about grades. We're not talking about here's what I think about this player and here's a list. No, we talk about 532 prospects on our website at footballgameplan.com/FBGP scouting. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/footballgameplan. Right now, we're dumping out all of our sleeper prospect videos. They're about 2 minutes long. So we're just throwing those out there right now. A chance for you guys to get caught up on some of these underrated guys that may be priority free agents. So check those out. And also check out our 2 football books at footballgameplan.com/books. That's Football, A Love Story, and What Did Football Teach Me, where we've interviewed over 100 current and former player, coaches, executives about what they love about the game, what the game taught them, and what life lessons they've learned from the game of football. Again, footballgameplan.com/books.
I appreciate it, Emory, giving a lot of insights, giving us a lot of names to keep an eye on as we look forward to this draft process. And, hope to chat with you a little bit later on as we get a little bit closer to the draft, and maybe after the draft to get your thoughts on sort of what the Falcons picks.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks for coming on.
For everybody out there that tuned in on Facebook Live, we appreciate you guys giving us a listen. As you guys know, we're going to be here, obviously today's a Wednesday, but we'll usually be here on Tuesday nights and doing this thing on Facebook Live now as opposed to YouTube. So you guys can give us a like, share it, do all that stuff, subscribe to us on iTunes. You guys know the drill. If you want to get your questions in on the show, you can tweet at us. The show's Twitter handle is at FalconsPFC. You can use the hashtag FalconsMailbag. I'm at FalcFan. Scott is at KarasicS. For anybody who didn't see Charles, he was on the show earlier. His Twitter handle is at 4verts. So, check out our stuff at ProFootballCentral.com. We got a lot of great draft stuff coming up in the upcoming weeks, and we'll keep on diving in deep on this draft.